Changeling is finally coming, but are you prepared for her? Welcome back to Corky Gachas, and in this video, I'm going to talk about the Changeling meta teams because I know that a lot of people have been saving for Changeling. In fact, some of you guys have told me that you have skipped Tooth Fairy because you're going for Changeling. So in this video, I'm going to talk about her meta teams and how you can prepare for her and plan your income wisely so that you can craft the perfect team for your perfect waifu Changeling. So first things first, we're going to take a look at her skill set. As usual, for people that are unaware, she is our plant type hyper carry. You can see over here on premium website 6-star. And she has a ultimate that deals AoE damage and also inflicts poison. Her whole kit is revolving around poison. I think I've repeated this so many times by now. Moving on to her first skill, this is a single target skill, and in particular, what we want to note is that she has a very high multiplier, especially if you have 3 additional stacks of poison and her. So this is also the reason why you kind of have to craft a team around Changeling to maximize her potential, and why a lot of people will note certain units specifically if you do want to pull for Changeling. And over here you can see, right, on the 3-star card, if you were to calculate all of the max potential, it will go up to 100% plus another 100%, and it will go to 650% just from a single 3-star card. This is not an ultimate, and it can rival the ultimate of a lot of units, in fact. So this is why she is so freaking busted. Of course, the AoE damage is also quite significant. A lot of content is AoE based, hence Changeling is also going to excel in that, except for probably boss rate. So if you are really focused on that, she isn't going to be the best for it unless you have like a P5 Changeling. So next is going to be her second skill, which is a mass attack skill, and for this one it deals damage to 2 enemies. And over here you can see, right, if you have the stats down or negative status, it's going to do 30% more reality damage. And as I've mentioned before, these are the exact same multipliers as Beacon's skill, and this one deals 400% to 2 targets if they have the negative or stats down or control. So this is pretty decent. 800% damage just from a normal skill as well if you consider both targets. And of course, moving on to her insight, her inheritance, honestly it's not the best when you compare to other units, but it is still quite notable, especially when you look at I1. This is an integral insight whereby when you attack an enemy with poison, you're going to increase damage by 20%. So everything revolves around poison, and also notably when you start the battle, every 3 rounds you're going to apply the poison that lasts for 2 rounds. So this is going to have 100% uptime, provided the enemy you are actually hitting on doesn't die halfway, because if you were to kill them, then you have to wait for every 3 rounds before the poison is being reapplied to them, unless you were to inflict poison through other units or other methods. So Insight 2 just straight up gives her damage dealt plus 8%. This is quite standard of hyper carries. And Insight 3, when you attack enemies that are not afflicted with poison, inflicts poison for 2 rounds, and inflicting Genesis damage equals to 30% of her attack. So the problem with this is that you ideally would always want to attack a user with poison. So there are very little scenarios whereby this is going to be helpful, especially when you play with other users. So this is where the problem lies with her I3. Technically, it's not the strongest I3 when you look at her portraits, and I would say that honestly, Changeling or Changeling is very good already at Portrait 0, but if you were to get her to Portrait 2, you'll be able to extend the start of the round poison to 3 rounds. So this would have even better effect. So you are going to be able to activate BOTN, which is Blasphemy of the Night, a bit easier. But of course, you can also opt for using just Yearning Desire instead of Blasphemy of the Night, especially when it's not being amplified. I'm also going to talk about Psycube's variations when it comes to building teams later on as well, so that you guys can have a reference when it comes to that. Now moving on, before I show you guys the meta teams, I would also like to explain a bit of the primers of Changeling, how to optimize Changeling when it comes to her DPS, as well as also what a team needs in general. So for her DPS itself, there are various factors. There are buffs, there are debuffs, and also notably for Changeling, poison. So when it comes to priority, when it comes to DPS, you definitely want debuffs as well as poison. Buffs itself, I don't think that is quite important when it comes to the DPS overall factor. So this is what we are going to prioritize. And also, you do know that for difficult content, we do need to have sustain. So healer also needs to be in it. So when it comes to building a good Changeling team, try to incorporate the debuffs, the poison, as well as heal. All 3 will be ideal, but of course, you know, in 3-man battles, which I'm going to touch on first, we have limited slots. But this meta team, the first meta team that you are going to see a lot of, can comprise of everything, and that is the Changeling, Beacon, as well as Sothebyless meta team. So you're going to see this team being mentioned a lot because of various factors like I mentioned just now, debuffs poison as well as healing sustain. It has all of it. Sotheby provides both poison as well as heal, and then Beacon provides the debuffs. And also when it comes to a bit of utility, Beacon also has that seal. So it's pretty all-rounded team, and from a DPS standpoint, this would be able to maximize your DPS the most, bar none. None other teams would be able to compare to this when you look at optimal setups. Of course, you do not need to always have the optimal setups to go, but in this setup itself, if you were to use Blasphemy of the Night, you're going to have 100% uptime pretty easily, especially since when you look at Sotheby, right? Sotheby's poison is to 2 targets and also inflicts poison for 3 rounds. On base, it's 2 rounds, but with I1, you're already going to have 3 rounds. If you go to a 2-star card, it's going to be 4 rounds. Go to a 3-star card, it's going to be 6 rounds. So a lot of poison going on. And not to mention, you can also utilize the fact that because poisons, right, do take some time to actually take down. Every round, they're going to take a bit for 30% attack. So ideally, if you want to do burst, right, you can also use Sotheby's ultimate to create that burst, and then you are also very easily going to be able to apply back the poison to the targets using Sotheby again, or time it with Changelings every 3 rounds so that you are able to apply a fresh layer of poison on your enemies after using Sotheby's ultimate. And Sotheby's heal is kind of underrated. It does heal for quite a bit and can kind of consider as AP generous given the fact that it does last 2 rounds as compared to other heals, just that it wouldn't be able to crit. So that is one of the downsides. But when you look at Sotheby, she does encompass both the heal as well as the poison aspect. And honestly, when it comes to Beacon, it's a no-brainer debuffer. She's the premier debuffer for a Changeling team because she does lower reality defense, and not to mention she does have the seal and very high single target DPS as an ultimate when it comes to that, especially if you have a high portrait. So I think this team itself does bring about the best DPS. For coverage wise, you can safely use BOTN. If you want to use Yearning Desire, you can also do so at max amplification. It does rival BOTN and amplification 1. So when it comes to Psyche, very flexible for this team composition, and this is why this is the premier team when it comes to building a Changeling Poison team. Now moving on to our next team, we are going to introduce this for people that do not have Sotheby. So I know that a lot of people do not have Sotheby and they are thinking, hey, can I still draw for Changeling? Should I still pull for Changeling if I do not have Sotheby? And the answer is you can still do so. It really doesn't matter too much because there are other poison users out there if you really want to stick to the poison meta. So for that, you're going to have Kanjira, but she only comes out in 1.3 in Black Dwarf's banner, so you do have to wait for 21 days before you can draw for her. And also you do have to put in a bit of draw so that you can get her, right? It's not the easiest to hit a rate up 5-star unit as well. So if you do have Kanjira in the future in 1.3, you can use Kanjira as a replacement for Sotheby to cover the poison aspects. And like I mentioned just now, right, you do need to consider 3 aspects when it comes to Changeling building. You have to consider debuffs, poison, as well as healing. But honestly, in high difficulty content, healing is definitely the most important. So you definitely have to have sustain. So since you fill in Kanjira for the poison spot, you cannot slot in the debuffs unless you have a medicine pocket. So for medicine pocket, it kind of fits in well perfectly since her first skill does give the debuff card, but honestly, you wouldn't want to use it all the time. The DPS calcs does not favor a 1-turn debuff, but it can be handy when you're trying to clear cards, right, to have the damage increase as well. And since this team do not have any of the other users that use this, they do not have the sub DPS that use a debuff card like Beacon, like Baby Blue, or even like the Charmaine. So in this case, right, you can safely use Medicine Pocket as the debuffer come the healer. So honestly, not to be scoffed at, because sturdiness that the Medicine Pocket brings is quite decent, and the healing aspect is also very good. So the debuff can be kind of a bonus when you look at it. And like I mentioned, this team would cover the debuff, the poisons, as well as most importantly the sustain. So this is the first variation of the Kanjira Sotheby Changeling team. Now when it comes to the second variation of team, just a simple change. We are going to change Medicine Pocket for 2 Fairy, and we're going to have 2 Fairy Kanjira as well as Changeling or Changeling. So over here you can see, right, 2 Fairy's role is very simply sustain, and also she does provide debuff, but of course I don't think that she is the perfect fit when you compare to like Sotheby, because most notably, right, her debuff is dealing with crit, and Changeling itself do not have the highest crit technique. So even with 2 Fairy on her team, I do not recommend you guys to actually change to a crit build on Changeling. You would be better off with an attack build and a damage bonus build. So that build itself can still pair with 2 Fairy, just take her debuff as a bonus, use her mainly for her sustain skill. So in this team, you will also have everything comprised of a weaker debuff for sure, but definitely still a damage increase from that aspect. So you can still be able to buff up your Changeling to deal the maximum DPS. So these are the two variations when it comes to the Chanjira team whereby you do not have Sotheby. And also just a side note, right, optimally you do want your Chanjira to be at Portrait 1 because then the duration for the bonus poison stacks that she applied is going to be extended by 1 turn. So it'll be easier for you to maintain the uptime. So at P0, I think she's still okay, but P1 would be ideal when it comes to Chanjira Changeling tips. And at this point, you might be wondering, hey Corky, if I do not plan to pull for Chanjira or Black Dwarf because Black Dwarf banner not going to pull, so I wouldn't have Chanjira as well. Can I still play it if I do not have Sotheby? Can I still play Changeling? So to your question, I would say that you can still play in this third variation of the team, especially if you have to put for 2 fairy. So in this case, if you have 2 fairy, you can use a Changeling, Beacon and 2 fairy team. Honestly, the DPS is lower, especially if you want to insist on using Blasphemer or the Knight. But you can use this team with a bit of Sidecube variation. If you're using the Sidecube Yearning Desire or any of the other Sidecubes like Bounded Duty or even Brave New World, you can still get by, right? It's not the optimal DPS unlike our Sotheby, Beacon as well as a Changeling team, but without poisons just by herself, she can still function just fine, okay? So don't think that she necessarily need poisons from other aspects. Of course, it's good to have, but honestly, at the same time, Changeling is OP enough that even if you do not have the optimal setup, you are able to get by. So this is also for people that are planning to pull for Black Dwarf, but in the meantime, you already have Beacon, right? Potentially you can just use this, and in fact I would say that in this comp and in the Chanjira comp you are both intending to not use BOT and you're just going to use Yearning Desire Max Amplification. I don't think they make a big difference at all. So in this case, you can just run Yearning Desire, you can go with Beacon, you'll just rely on Changeling to apply her own poison stacks. But the good thing is, instead of a poison, you do have very strong debuffs in Beacon. So Beacon's DPS upgrade, right, for Changeling is not small at all. So if you were to consider the give and take whereby you lose poison but technically you get better debuffs, right? It kind of balances it out, to be honest. So do not fret too much if you do not have a poison user. You can still go for the Beacon TF variation. So I wouldn't recommend you to go with this if you only have MP though, because if you do not even have TF, you have Medicine Pocket, the debuffs clashes with Beacon, so it's kind of hard for this to work. Alternatively, of course, you can slot in other users like Druvis, you can slot in like Unli, but ideally, I do think that if you have Beacon, try to use Beacon because of the debuffs. It's going to provide so much more in a 3-man party to Changeling, to overall DPS as compared to other users. So these are the 4 meta teams that you're going to build for 3-man parties when it comes to optimizing DPS with poison and without poison. Now moving on to our 4-man party Changeling teams. Honestly, now the options will expand a bit more. I'm also going to talk about future units, and the first one I'd like to mention that I see a lot of people adding into the first variation, which is the Changeling, Beacon, as well as the Sotheby team, is Unli. So for this one, the benefit is that all of these are plant units. So especially if you are trying to tackle the Star Afflictor units, right, you are going to have a full Afflictors bonus, and Unli does do very decent DPS, so she can be a very reliable sub DPS, and not to mention her team-wide buff. So like I mentioned, buff, debuff, poison, as well as sustain. This would encompass everything. You have everything already. So this 4th unit in Unli is a perfect fit for the first variation. You are going to have buffs, and also notably you are going to upgrade cards. With that, you are going to be able to shuffle. Even if you were to land on a Sotheby card, even if you are going to land on a Beacon debuff, it is always going to be good. So this is the first variation, adding Unli. The next one is going to be Druvis. So Druvis is very good because of her I3, whereby it increases the damage heal as well as the leech rate. So this is very important buffs when it comes to the overall team sustain. And also notably, right, you also have to understand that Druvis brings about a lot of control that this Changeling team actually lacks. So what Changeling team have is poison, DPS and more DPS. So that is basically it. So when it comes to very difficult content, if you still have difficulty clearing or you're trying to clear with low investment, you do need some form of control. So Druvis, if you already built it in the earlier seasons, feel free to slot her in as well. So this is going to be your second unit, whereby it's going to focus a lot more on controlling, especially if the enemies are not immune to any of those control statuses. You are definitely going to want to put in Druvis, and she's going to fit right in with her control as well as the sustain that she provides to the team. Now when it comes to the final unit that I'm going to introduce for this flex slot, it is going to be a future unit in 6. I know some of you guys might not be familiar with 6, but at P0, which we are talking of course at P0, Assumption Mate is going to be a buffer role. So in that case, if you were to add him into your team as the 4th unit, he is going to play that good buffalo, and in 4-man battles, 6 is pretty OP. He can passively provide buffs with his I3 without you moving, so AP generous in that sense. But even if you were to move him, he's able to provide a single target buff and can upgrade cards similar to Anali, but except the fact that he can upgrade the target's card instead of their own cards, which is optimal, right? Ideally, you want to upgrade your massive hyper carry DPS card, and in this case, Changling's card can be upgraded, so you do not have to play the RNG game with the shuffle mechanic that you have the tuning with, but instead you can target the buff on Changeling to make Changeling stronger for sure. This whole team, right, Changeling team usually only revolves around Changeling as the main DPS, although sub DPS can be great, but the main bulk of the DPS is going to come from Changeling, so buffing them is going to be great. Also does add on a bit to the negative status scenario whereby BOTN can be easily triggered as well. If you don't have poisons, you can try running 6 as well. It's not going to be as consistent when it comes to providing the 2 negative status for Changeling to have 100% BOTN, but it's still better than nothing. If you don't have Sotheby, you don't have Kanjira, I think that for the last team whereby it comes to Changeling, Beacon, TF, slotting in 6 can be a good idea because of the potential of him adding negative status and also additionally adding the DPS that they are lacking because of the lack of poison in the team comp itself. So these are just all of the meta team comps that I've seen from China server, and of course on the screen you can see all of the footage as I've introduced the teams. These are the teams that I think personally are the most viable and also the most popular ones when it comes to my personal research of CN server. Now of course I know that there is still some time until Changeling actually drops in 1.2. If you're instead interested in seeing people pull for Tooth Fairy and seeing how my luck went for Tooth Fairy, definitely check out this stream highlight over here. I'll see you guys over there. This is Quacky Gachas signing off.